So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for Approaches to Discovering Your Customer. My name is Melissa Byrne. I am the Director of Innovation Programs at the Polsky Center. I am also an instructor in the National I-Corps program run through the National Science Foundation, where we really focus on customer discovery. So this is certainly a topic that I'm very passionate about and spend much of my time teaching on, and I'm excited to share with you today. So over the next hour, we are going to do a number of things. We will be focusing on defining the term customer discovery. We're going to be identifying methods for conducting good customer discovery. We're going to be reviewing customer discovery interview techniques in particular and helping you set some realistic but high-achieving goals for your own customer discovery journey. So we have a lot to get through over the next hour, but I'm confident that we will be able to do it. All right, to warm up, what I would like for you to do in the chat feature or by raising your hand is to tell me, who is the customer in this picture? Who is the customer? Great, I see some answers coming in. Perfect. So most of you are saying that the person swiping the credit card. Some of you are saying both people, the arm that we see and the person swiping the credit card are the customer. And I think that that's a really appropriate answer, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think it would be true that the woman or individual swiping the credit card in this picture is the customer if the product or service we're talking about is whatever that person is paying for. So whether it was a service or a product that they're paying for, that would make sense. But what if I told you that the solution is actually the point of sale software that we see on the monitor? If we're thinking about the solution as a point of sale software, who is the customer for that? Please be as specific as you can about who you think the customer is for a point of sale software. And I see some people did put in there sort of, it depends on what's being sold. Yeah, the merchant, the vendor, the retailer, business owner. These are all great examples. Exactly, the salesperson. So yeah, more specifically, it could be the store manager or sales manager. It really depends on the size of this organization and what their title might be. Perfect, so you're getting the gist of it. Okay, what if I told you that actually the solution that I'm talking about is a consumer behavior monitoring system? Who would be a customer for something like a behavior monitoring system for consumers? The credit card company, yeah, great idea. I'm sure that they would love to understand. A marketing company, yeah, powerful tools about what consumer behaviors looks like. Any other ideas? A wholesale company, a research marketing company, yeah, that makes sense. Amazon, right, could be a bit more specific example of a large company who's interested in consumer behaviors. Exactly. So thank you for jumping in and sharing this. This example is meant to illustrate that identifying our customer is not always as simple as maybe focusing on our end user or the consumer who's going to end up using our product or receiving benefits from our service. Exactly. So now I want to sort of look at a slightly different and very timely example. So if we look at this picture here and we think about the product being a new vaccine, which I'm sure many of us have spent some time thinking about a new vaccine being released, I want to ask you some questions specifically about what we're seeing here. So who is the end user or recipient of a new vaccine? The patient. Okay, someone said the doctor. Most people are saying patient. Yeah, I think that's right. So when in this, the recipient is this individual who's sort of getting the shot in his arm. He's receiving the vaccine himself. Perfect. Okay. Now, if we think about who might be an influencer, This is a person who may influence the patient themselves, may influence the ability to get the vaccine to market. What kind of person in a healthcare setting might be an influencer and perhaps is pictured in this image or is not? Doctor, yeah, a doctor can certainly influence whether or not patients have access to vaccines. The CDC, great. So a governmental organization who's responsible for thinking about population health, public health officials, government. Exactly, great examples. And then what about sort of an economic buyer? Let's say the vaccine was developed in a research lab. Who's our sort of buyer of the vaccine product? Hospitals could be, yeah. Payers or government, pharmacy. Yeah, I mean, if it was developed outside of a biotech company or a life science company, you might say that the economic buyer would be actually the biotech company who's trying to take an early stage product and get it to market. It could be any of these number of individuals who you've listed here. So this is perfect. What these two examples illustrate is that when we use the term customer, we actually might be referring to one or more individuals in a broader customer stakeholder ecosystem. So a version of this stakeholder map here can be a helpful way of illustrating unique but often related personas in our customer segment. And in some cases, your end user will also be your economic buyer. In those cases, you know, when you go out and talk to your customer, you're talking to both in some ways, person wearing an end user hat and an economic buyer hat, which is great. That probably reduces perhaps the number of people that you might need to sort of go and talk to and get feedback from. But in many industries, and particularly in B2B business models, you know, there are multiple stakeholders who will influence and inform decisions of the economic buyer and the end user. And so understanding each of these unique stakeholder roles will help you overcome any barriers that you may face as you try to launch your solution. And we saw in the chat that this question of sort of who's the economic buyer actually solicited many different answers. And that's really common at the early stages of thinking about your solution, the problem you want to solve, and trying to figure out sort of who is that economic buyer, who's the decision makers that you should be talking to. And it's pretty common to have questions about, especially in places like healthcare, is it the physician? Is it the hospital? Is it insurance companies? Is it the FDA, right? So really beginning to understand what the stakeholder maps will help you try to understand whether or not the economic buyer and the end user or the person getting the downstream value are one and the same or sort of separate but related segments. And for purposes of early customer discovery, it's really important to focus on the economic buyer and the end user, and both of them if they're separate people. And the reason is that essentially you can't have a successful business if you don't have people who are willing to pay for your solution and people that are going to derive value from your solution. So even though voices from all of these stakeholders are really necessary as you build out your business model and create a space where your business can have success in the market, the voices of your economic buyer and your end user are incredibly, incredibly valuable at this early stage. So with this in mind, what I now want you to put in the chat feature is, I'm assuming you came to today's workshop with either an idea, perhaps you're further along and you might have an MVP, or you may be somewhere in between idea stage and your first version of your solution. And you probably have some guesses about sort of who your customer is if we're thinking about them as an economic buyer and or an end user. So in the chat feature, what I want you to tell me, and be as specific as you can in terms of their title or their role, is who is your end user or economic buyer? And if they're different, I'd love for you to list both for me. So sort of end user and then their title or their, some sort of description, and economic buyer. This will help me make sure that as we move through today's workshop, I can design some examples that really cater to the types of customers who you're thinking about going out and trying to talk with. So I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. And remember, at this stage, it's really normal for this to be a guess. I like to tell teams who I coach in this process that it's often like sort of looking at a fuzzy image. It will become more clear as you dig in, so just take a best guess at this point. Great, I see some answers coming in. I like the specificity that I'm seeing, excellent. Great. So we've got a nice mix here of people who are working on products from everything like nonprofit, NGO-related services. We have some fishing technology. We have parents. We have healthcare. We have business leaders. This is great. Perfect. Thanks for that. Hopefully this will help also you sort of focus for what's to come today. So now that you know as best you can who you'll be targeting for customer discovery, let's talk about why it's important to spend time really researching and understanding your customer. Before I tell you why I think it's important, I want to have one more piece of information from everybody participating in today's session. Using the thumbs up that is available at the bottom of your screen, hopefully. And if not, then you can just give me a yes in the chat feature. I'd like to know how many of you are actually individuals who have personally experienced the pain point or the problem or the inconvenience that your solution solves. How many of you feel like you are versions of your customer? You're solving your own problem. Great, a lot of you. That's fantastic. That's really common too. I mean, I have to say that as entrepreneurs, some of the things that really inspire us to move forward and to take on risk and to try to solve important problems is because we have experienced, or someone we know close to us has experienced, a challenge, and we want to help solve that. And that's a great place to start as an entrepreneur. So I'm not surprised. I'm actually encouraged that many of you sort of know what it's like to perhaps be a customer for your solution. The problem is that you're not actually your customer. You are one version of who your customers will be. And so recognizing that you have sort of your own unique values, your own experiences, you represent one demographic of likely a much broader group of people, it's important to recognize that you need to actually go out and find who else other than you would actually find benefit in the solution you have to offer, and importantly, be willing to pay for this. So that's reason number one why we actually go out and talk to customers, because we are not them, even if we understand the problem. Two is, at this early stage, your business is based on a lot of assumptions, and that's completely normal. And these assumptions actually cannot be tested until you have found paying customers and you're getting customer feedback and you're building your business. And until then, everything we think about, our idea, our solution, the way our technology should function or look, are all hypotheses. And so customer discovery is all about testing out these assumptions and these hypotheses to figure out as best we can whether the way we're approaching it and thinking about it is in fact representative and as true as we can find it to be in this early discovery phase. So this sort of testing of hypotheses and assumptions will help you de-risk your business model by going out and confirming with other individuals who represent your customer that you're thinking about your solution in the right way with sort of the best case business model. And it's expensive to skip this process. So many entrepreneurs, we get excited about building out the solution and getting it in the hands of users. And in the rush to do that, it can be really easy to skip over customer discovery. And so I'm thrilled that almost 100 people today have decided to spend an hour of their time at least thinking about customer discovery and trying to dig into this as a way of recognizing that the philosophy of sort of if you build it, they will come is really expensive and risky because you're often going to get it wrong if you're only coming at it with a narrow perspective. So we're looking to widen our perspective and come up with a solution and find the right customer segment for it. So customer discovery, or some of you may have heard the term primary market research, can be approached through a variety of methods. You're likely familiar with many of these listed up on the screen, and each of these methods will serve a unique purpose. They provide very distinct value. For example, things like immersion or observation can be incredibly helpful in understanding the experience of your customer and often witnessing sort of that pain point in action, and that's really helpful. Likewise, surveys and focus groups can give you very helpful and sort of higher volume feedback about specific details or aspects of the solution you're working to deliver. And on the other side, user testing will tell you exactly like what features your customers like and dislike, how they're going to interact with your product, which is really helpful for product development itself. The challenge is that these methods listed here that I just described are, prone to bias. For example, people may feel inclined to be less than honest in something like a survey or a focus group. And user testing really limits your customers to sort of just responding to what's in front of them rather than sort of opening up their minds and giving you feedback on other things that could be equally as important than what they see in front of them. And so what I'm asking you to focus on today is to use specifically the approach of customer discovery interviews. The reason being that these are a less biased approach to going out and really understanding your customer segment and making sure that you're headed in the right track and that you've actually found the right segment of people who want and desire your solution. So customer discovery interviews are one-on-one conversations with someone who represents your customer. The goal is to ask this person and multiple people like them open-ended questions about themselves. This will really allow them to reveal to you their motivations, their behaviors, and priorities. And these insights will then enable you to determine whether you found the right customer segment who cares about the problem that you are solving and is most importantly willing to pay for it. So today's training will largely be focused on customer discovery interviews and the methodology and best practices around that. But I did want to sort of just say that there are many other techniques that will help you answer other questions that you should work into your broader customer discovery journey. So just to reiterate, customer discovery interviews are not for user testing or customer acquisition. So user testing and customer acquisition are two activities that we work with a lot of entrepreneurs on and is vitally important to developing your product and getting to market. But assuming you're all at the relatively early stage of customer discovery, I really want you to focus on customer discovery interviews right now. And this doesn't mean that customer discovery interviews will answer all of your questions. It's certainly not a substitute for user testing or customer acquisition strategies. Those are things that should come after customer discovery interviews, which is why I want to start here. So what is the goal of customer discovery interviews? They're really to help get you out of the building is the phrase that Steve Blank, who's a well-known entrepreneur who spends a lot of time talking about customer discovery, uses this phrase. It's essentially to mean sort of get out of your comfort zone, come out of your own experience, move outside of your network, talk to people who represent your customer that are not you or your family members who love you dearly. Make sure that you're getting that sort of unbiased opinion as you shape and design your solution and how you want to get to market. It's important that these conversations focus on that individual. So they're not about your solution. They're not about your unique approach to solving an age-old problem. They're about that person. How are they behaving and making decisions? What influences their work? What do they care about? How important is this problem that you're solving to them at this time? And these answers will help you really appreciate whether or not this is a segment who will be likely to want your solution. The goal is to be a good listener, to really listen for what's being said and shared with you throughout these conversations. Again, we're testing assumptions both around who is your customer, who are these stakeholders who are going to be influencing purchasing decisions and use decisions, and sort of how are these economic buyers making decisions about what new solutions or products to bring in. And ultimately sort of testing what value you actually can bring to this segment. So you are likely saying, I have a solution or an idea or a product, it's going to solve a problem or a desire or a demand, and I think I know who that person is, and your goal is to go out and test that that's actually correct, that you sort of found the right group. And this is really another term you may have heard for this, is trying to find product market fit. So again, the connection between the value you can deliver and the group of people who will be most willing and interested in deriving that value and paying you for it. So today we're going to focus on steps 1 through 4 listed here of the customer discovery interview process. And we won't have a chance to spend a lot of time on steps 5, 6, and 7, analyzing the feedback, adjusting and pivoting, repeating the process. But I just want to say that this is meant to be a repeatable process. You should be taking your customer discovery interviews and analyzing them to be able to answer questions around sort of, did you talk to the right group of people? Did anyone give you feedback to suggest that there's a different, related, or unrelated segment that may be as excited or more excited about your solution? And so I'm going to sort of have you focus in on these ones that you listed today in the chat feature, but you should know that this is the same process that you can repeat with others who you may have considered listing as your end users and your economic buyers in the chat feature. So we're going to roll into sort of these 4 steps for the second half of the presentation, and then we'll leave time at the end for any questions that you may have for me, either about the information that I was able to share today with you or other related topics in terms of customer discovery. All right, so step number 1 in the process is really all about designing your interview questions. And I like to refer to this as an interview guide, mostly because it's not a script. So I want this to be something where you've thought ahead of time about the types of questions you need to be asking in order to get the most value out of these conversations. This should be something that helps inform your conversation, but in order to do this process really well, you should not use it as a script. Each unique individual who you're talking to will have a set of their own unique experiences and background and expertise, and you'll need to sort of flex the conversation to accommodate those nuances between the people that you're talking with. So just want to make sure we're not thinking about this as a script and that we're thinking about this as something that will guide our conversation. So first and foremost, all of your interview questions should be phrased as open-ended questions. And we'll talk a little bit more in just a minute about some examples of what those questions might sound like and look like. But essentially what we want to avoid is someone being able to simply give you yes or no information. That's not really that valuable. And so what we want to try to do is ask questions in a way that's really going to solicit truthful and honest and robust feedback from the individual who you're talking with in your customer discovery interviews. In these interviews, although many of you are likely experts in your domains and you're probably used to selling and pitching your venture and trying to get people on board, these conversations are specifically not about your solution. So you should not approach them with the idea that you're going to tell them about what you're working on or get feedback around the way you want to solve the problem. It's really a chance for you to set aside that expert hat and put on more of an exploratory persona where you're trying to, again, learn about the expertise that the individual in front of you has rather than sharing your own expertise. So as I mentioned earlier, your business at this point is built on a bunch of assumptions. That's normal, that's common, so how do we test them? Well, what you want to do is to try to figure out and ask yourself sort of what are those key assumptions that your business at this point is built on? These are hypotheses that, if proven incorrect, would completely undermine your business. So, for example, if I had the assumption that I was operating on where price was the most important factor when selecting a new software vendor, let's say, then I need to design a question that's going to help me figure out whether or not that's a true assumption. So is the person I'm talking to, is it true that price is the most important factor? So what that might sound like is a question posed to the individual like, tell me about a time when you had to select a new software vendor. What was the driving factor or factors in your decision-making process? So what this is meant to do is to give them the space to sort of tell me how they behaved in the past, because the way they behaved in the past is going to be much more indicative of how they behave in the future than if I had asked them something like, if you imagine buying a new vendor, like what would that process look like? Or what would be important to you? They're, in that case, guessing how they'll behave. If I ask them to tell me a story about the way they behaved in the past, what I'm hearing from them is more important and crucial to me as a sort of a founder trying to launch a product, which is more likely how they're going to behave in the future than how they think they will. And so if I can get them to tell me about a story about what drove them before, I can sort of infer and validate that, in fact, price is or is not that most important factor when they made that purchasing decision. And this certainly wouldn't be the only question I ask if this is one of my key assumptions. Depending on how they answered me, I may ask questions like, why was that the case? Or who else was involved that helped make that factor critically important? Or what other stressors was your organization under when they were making this decision? Again, trying to ask questions to understand, how important is pricing in terms of what drives their decision-making behavior. I'm going to pause here because I see a question on chat and I don't want to lose track of it. It says part of customer discovery is determining if people are willing to pay for the solution, not necessarily your end user, but some customer. How do you test willingness to pay without leading the witness? This is a great question. Something like willingness to pay could be phrased in a question similar to the example I gave here, meaning you could ask people, when was the last time that you purchased a new product sort of in a similar category that yours might be in? Or when was let's say I'm trying to sell a new skincare line. I might say, when was the last time that you purchased lotion or other body products for yourself? How often do you purchase those? What is your general pricing range that you're comfortable paying for those? That way I'm really trying to understand, again, how they've behaved in the past, and that information can help inform where my product needs to come in terms of pricing and, in fact, their willingness to pay. So hopefully that's helpful. If you have a more discrete question, feel free to pop that into the chat and I can come back to that. But again, the phrasing of these questions will be what's really important, so that you're not putting someone on the spot where they may feel uncomfortable answering you, but you're asking for those stories. People love to talk about ourselves, and so phrasing things in a question that allows us to recall to you something that we experienced and sort of share with you our insights will enable you to really begin to understand how the person in front of you does in fact behave and sort of seek information and end up making purchasing decisions. So another way to think about sort of how you come up with interview questions is the pain and gain model. So this is where you think about questions that are really about either pains that that person experiences or gains that they either like or wish that they could have. So these are just some examples here of pains that you could, be more specific as you phrase these questions, but you may want to integrate into your conversation. So sometimes if you're talking to someone about aspects of their work where you think you can make a difference, you may want to narrow down a question. If I asked, one of you on the phone, what frustrates you, you might send me in all different directions. It may be professional and personal. It may be social and more local. It may be international challenges that frustrates you. So I would want to ask you the question that's more specific to the solution that I'm offering. So again, let's pretend like I have a skincare line. I might say, what's one of the things that really frustrates you about current skincare products on the market? So then I'm sort of narrowing in the conversation and yet letting them tell me, not just something about lotion or not just something about soap, but instead sort of globally within the skincare lines that are out there, what bothers them or frustrates them. The benefit of focusing on pains is your solution likely is solving some sort of pain. Now, these can be big problems, like our vaccine. We want a coronavirus vaccine. Or it could be relatively sort of small problems, meaning that they're nice to haves, or we're solving an inconvenience, or we're trying to bring people together in a way that they don't realize that they want to be together, but they really want to unite with one another. All of those things are solving some sort of problem, whether it's sort of known or perceived by the individual or not. And so the pain question will help you figure out exactly how they feel about some of these pain points. On the flip side of that, gains are, more along the lines of either what are their aspirational goals, what drives them and motivates them, what do they wish they could see or have. A favorite question in a lot of customer discovery interviews at the, somewhere either at the beginning or the end is sort of like, if you have a magic wand, what would you change about X, Y, and Z? What would you change about your process for getting ledgers out the door? What would you change about your way to get from here to there? These kinds of questions can help you figure out whether or not the particular sort of area that you're focusing on has a significant impact on that particular individual. So again, what you're ultimately trying to figure out is like, is this person someone who's going to care about my pains or the pain I can solve or the gains I can give them enough that they actually represent my customer segment? If the answer is no, that doesn't mean you should derail your solution. It just means you're probably not finding in that individual the type of customer who you ultimately want to find. And so you should go and have more conversations and figure out what exactly your customer ends up looking like in terms of their behavior, their characteristics, their demographics, their psychographics, all the things that will make up your customer persona one day. So what I want for you to do that we don't have time to do in the session today is to work on your list of interview questions. I'd like to give you each a goal of developing 10 questions. Your conversations, depending on how long they are, whether it's a 15-minute conversation with a customer or a 45-minute conversation with a customer, could certainly cover lots of ground, everywhere from 3 questions to 20 questions, depending on how long you have and how talkative the person you're talking with is. But 10 is a pretty good number to sort of get you started. You should really focus on what are those top assumptions that you need to solve. How do you figure out whether this person is in fact the right customer for you, whether that's your end user or your economic buyer? What are the questions that you can ask that will help you answer that question as quickly as possible and figure out whether or not this is a person who you should sort of circle back to when you're ready to be in sales mode, or whether you should use them to refer you to someone else who may have more specifically the type of expertise or experience that you want. I see some questions coming in right now about sort of how do you select who to interview? Do you cold call? These are things that we'll get to in just a minute. I love that people are asking themselves these questions. And we'll also talk about sort of virtual challenges in just a little bit for how you conduct customer discovery in today's sort of modern world and experiences. Okay, so once you have your sort of set of questions, again, they're open-ended, they're focused on pains and gains, they're trying to help you determine quickly whether or not you have sort of found someone who might care about your product and the solution that you can offer and is willing to pay. Now we need to ask the question sort of, where are these? So great question in the chat, how do I find these people? First, start with people you already know. Within your networks, you either have individuals who maybe on the best case scenario represent your customer or are in some way connected to your customer. So you can think about your familial network, you can think about your professional network, you can think about your friend network, alumni network, all of the different spheres where you're related. There are likely people who have some access to a version of your customer. The thing about customer discovery interviews too is that, especially in B2B businesses, you often have to sort of work your way to the right person, because on the outside of the organization, even if we do really excellent online research and try to find the name of the person based on their role who we think is the right person to talk to, when we talked with them, they may have other responsibilities or slightly different expertise than we imagined. And so getting in the door to an organization or to a different network will help you get to the right person. Meaning if I talk to one of you on the phone or on video, and I think that you have some expertise in skincare, but in fact, maybe you're just working with a vendor, you at least will learn about me and the questions I'm asking, and likely in your own network be able to refer me to a better person to talk to. So some of this is kind of advancing and getting closer and closer to the right person. Regardless, think about who's in your network that you can leverage. Those individuals can either be people you interview, or they can introduce you to individuals for you to interview. We call these, sort of warm introductions. They're really powerful. They can help get you past that barrier of someone, saying no to you really easily as a stranger. And if they won't make an introduction, you can always reference your shared connection when you reach out to the individual who is in their network. I also want to talk about watering holes. These are, this is the place where your customer segment may be gathering, and I'll talk in just a moment and give you some examples about where you can look to find these watering holes for your individuals. And then most importantly, as you get started and you use your personal network, it's important that you make sure you don't conclude customer discovery without having left your personal network. So the people who know you or are sort of 2 degrees away from you are more likely to be very kind to you and perhaps be not as transparent or honest with you about their feedback. They may really just want to encourage you and support you. And getting outside of your network will ensure that you're really getting that unbiased feedback that you need from strangers who have no skin in the game other than they care probably about the problem that you're solving. And so it's important that you start in your network, but make sure you're moving outside of it as well. Okay, so where do you find these people? First of all, LinkedIn is an incredibly powerful tool. I highly recommend that you use it to search for individuals, to grow your network, and you can even pay for a premium account, which will get you easier access to contacting the individuals, being able to email them, and being able to write longer messages. If you're not at a stage where you can or want to pay for LinkedIn Premium, There's also a sort of easy way to try to first connect with the person through a short form introduction in the Connect tool. So introduce yourself, talk about what your shared connection is with them, or the thing that you care about that you believe they also care about and that you'd love to connect with them. Once they've accepted your request to be connected, you can send them a message that's longer introducing yourself, and we'll talk in a minute about what that outreach should sound and look like. So use LinkedIn, really powerful tool to find people. Social media platforms, equally as powerful. I would sort of think about and make some guesses around, for your customer segment, what social media platforms are they using? Is this a Facebook-related customer segment? Are they using Twitter? Are they using Instagram or other platforms? And it's important for you to sort of follow them, meaning you need to start using those platforms and connecting and getting into threads and following influencers who either are your customer or are drawing your customers together. So this is a really powerful thing that you should be ready to take full advantage of. So following influencers and then looking at their followers, sending direct messages, those are all really useful ways of trying to, again, connect and find people who you can talk to through a customer discovery interview. For some of you, depending on your industry, there may be sort of blogs or online forums that are really helpful that you should get connected with and sort of keep an eye out for and connect with individuals who are posting on there. The same is true of sort of professional association or membership-based organizations. This can be a good use of funds to get connected to those memberships if you're not already, so that you're sort of in the know, you're seeing what's being posted, you're seeing advertising for events where you can go and meet people. So really think proactively about how you begin surrounding yourself with people who represent who you believe to be your customer at this point. This is a lot of legwork. I won't undermine how much work goes into customer discovery, but it will be really informative for you first and foremost to kind of be a fly on the wall in these online forums where your customers are gathering. And it will also give you access to individuals when you're ready to reach out to them and request time to talk with them. Finally, we've had some teams who have had luck putting ads in something like trade journals or Facebook requesting people to talk with. So sometimes a paid ad can let people know that you're really interested in a certain group's feedback. You should be as specific as you can in those ads for who you want to target and reach out to you. But that's one way, instead of you sort of going and finding people to talk with, people actually coming to you and saying, yes, I identify as that type of person that you're looking to connect with. Again, people like to share their experiences and feedback, so these ads can be fruitful if you think about how to phrase the ask in a way that will be exciting and interesting to individuals in that sense. And finally, conferences are still happening. In today's pandemic world, these are all virtual, but they are still occurring. And so I highly encourage you, again, in the spirit of surrounding yourself with your customers, to think about, what events might be happening over the next month or series of months that you can and should participate in, to hear conversations that are being had, to learn the names of key influencers, right? So these conferences are bringing keynotes, they're bringing guest speakers. Those are going to be influencers on your customer sort of segment and stakeholder map. And so getting to know them will make you a more informed founder in terms of understanding who your customers are looking to for guidance on everything from sort of business advice to trends, etc. So think about what conferences you should be participating in right now. Looking at a couple questions in chat, I see that someone is asking for advice on public sector as customers. So how do you do customer discovery in the public sector? I would say all of these concepts apply equally to private industries as well as public sectors. And in fact, in many public sectors, particularly in government organizations, whether that's local or national, there is more information actually online, names, contact information, roles. And so sometimes actually there can be a leg up versus in private industries, companies may not always list the email addresses, let's say, of people who you're trying to reach. And so sometimes the public sector can be helpful in that way, but all of these concepts still apply. What conferences are they going to? What are the unique sort of publications that they're looking to, or who are the, thought leaders that they're thinking about and maybe reading books about and participating in online forums. So all of these should apply equally to that market. All right, so once you've designed your questions, figured out where your customers are, step number 3 is reaching out to those individuals. So the goal of this, first and foremost, is to pique interest and secure an interview. That is what outreach is all about. This is not a place for you to give your full sales pitch. This is certainly not a time for you to describe your entire background and your whole suite of expertise. This is a chance for you to let people know that you're interested in their expertise and that you're looking for some time on their calendar. I'm going to give you an example in just a minute of a style of outreach approach that you can use and test out. Ultimately, this is all about experimentation. Every unique customer segment that each of you is exploring will have nuances. They'll have different trust tolerance levels. They may be more or less willing to talk to a stranger. And so it's important that you feel prepared to experiment. And I highly recommend, especially early on, that you kind of do A/B testing, meaning you have 2 versions of your outreach. You send it to similar people and you see, how quickly are they responding? Did they respond at all? Are they willing to give you time on their calendar? This will help you refine and make your outreach more and more successful over time. Again, the goal is to get this interview with them. So as you also get to know your customer, you will be able to sort of, again, refine what that outreach sounds like. You'll begin to hear what they respond to. Do they want to talk to you because you're a student and they love helping students? Do they want to talk to you because you have expertise and they really value expertise? So listen for your customers and, again, figure out what works for them. I see a question here in chat. When is it an appropriate or good idea to compensate for interviews versus not? A couple of people have asked that question. My general feeling, and this is having coached in iCore over 500 people in the past few years, is that most people will talk to you for free. If you can save your money and not incentivize people, you will likely find people, in fact, who will be willing to talk with you, who want to give back, who want to share their expertise, and will do so for free. And sometimes incentivizing people will actually get you a subset of the people you want to talk to and may, in fact, negatively influence the voices that you're hearing. Meaning, if someone doesn't want to be compensated or something feels icky about compensation, they may have important feedback that you need to hear, and you may have just sort of dissuaded them from wanting to engage with you, versus someone who's only in it for compensation may not have, really important value to offer you in terms of that customer voice as well. So be careful with it. Sometimes it's helpful, but I would caution you from starting there. So consider your persona. As I mentioned, a lot of people love to help students. So you can be a student, you can be a researcher because you're researching, a pain point or an experience. You are an entrepreneur. You could represent yourself as an entrepreneur. You could talk about yourself as a problem solver, but whatever you do, avoid sounding like a salesperson. Nobody likes to get a sales call. They will not be interested in talking with you most likely, and so be very cautious here. So here's some tips on your outreach messaging. Think about your persona. Will it be beneficial for you to be someone who's a student or researcher, or is it more beneficial for you to be an entrepreneur? I can't answer that for you. You'll have to test that out yourself. My instinct is that entrepreneurs, again, can come off a little salesy, and depending on who you're talking to, they may be hesitant to talk to a salesperson. We all love talking about problems and shared interest and impact of our work. And so sometimes that can be more effective. So here are some tips up here that I'm going to let you read, and then I'll give you an example of what an outreach message could sound like. So using the format that you just saw, here's an example of what that might sound like. One of the things to call out here is that it needs to be actionable. The way that I ended it is I gave them a link to schedule time with me. One of the things you want to avoid is the disconnect between someone getting your message, sitting on it, thinking about responding, checking their calendar, responding back to you, and then the back and forth of trying to schedule it. So that can often lead to drop off in terms of someone who may be initially really excited and willing to talk to you, but that sort of extra step of trying to connect with you may sort of end up deterring them from making that connection happen. So I recommend, if possible, making it really easy for them to directly schedule time with you and trying to secure it off the bat. All right, so the next step, once you've secured an interview on someone's calendar, is to interview them. So in terms of the conversation, it's important that you set the stage for the conversation. You want to start broad so that you don't narrow in specifically on like where your solution falls. The reason for this is, again, we're trying to figure out where the problem you're solving or the benefit you want to deliver, where that falls into their grand scheme of priorities and needs. If you narrow in, you may miss the point that, like, sure, they'll talk to you about, you know, again, my skincare product, but I actually may miss the fact that they are not that into skincare at all. And so if I ask them lots of questions, I may inadvertently think that they're a customer when in fact this may not be for them. So think about how to set the stage for the conversation, how you want to introduce yourself, and say exactly sort of where you're starting in terms of the topic you want to discuss. Then you'll use your interview guide, thinking about sort of, again, what questions to ask sort of first versus last, and be really careful to watch for strong emotions. I highly recommend that you use something like Zoom or Skype or Google Meet to have video conversations, because body language is a really powerful thing. If you ask them a question and they have a physical reaction to it, whether it's sort of good or bad, that tells you you should spend some time digging in more on that, right? We want to understand what's behind that reaction. Similarly, if they seem distracted or bored, it may tell you that maybe they're sort of either not engaged or there's something preventing them from talking with you, and you may want to sort of pivot your conversation to try a new approach to get them to open up. You should definitely ask them, like I already mentioned, for stories. As a reminder, please don't talk about your solution. If toward the end of the conversation they say, you seem really interested in this particular space, you know, what is it that you're working on? You are welcome to say something like, yeah, I have an idea for a solution, but before I build it or before I launch it, I'm really wanting to make sure that I'm hitting the right needs or hitting the mark on this. And so your input is really valuable to me. You could even say, if you're interested, I'd love to circle back with you in a few weeks or a few months when I have something that I'm ready to share. Those are all ways of sort of keeping this person warm, and if they're expressing, in fact, an interest in learning more about you and what you're working on. And for all conversations, you should ask for those referrals. So based on, you know, our conversation and now you knowing what I'm really interested in talking about, who in your network do you think I should talk to? Who would have great insights for me? And that person, I'm sure, will be willing to give you at least the names of individuals. You can certainly ask for those names. You can ask for an email introduction. Sometimes sending them, if they're willing to send an email introduction, giving them sort of a brief description on you and your outreach message will make their job of connecting you to that person even easier. So take advantage of those individuals' networks, because that's how you're going to grow your pool of people to talk with. And be sure to follow up with a thank you note, whether it's a physical note or an email or a message on social media. You know, these individuals have offered some of their very valuable time, and you may in fact want to circle back with them when you're in sales mode or when you're ready to do product testing or other customer acquisition strategies. And so it's important that you've, you know, expressed to them your thankfulness for the time that they were willing to give you. So I saw a couple questions come through kind of around like, how many interviews do we do? You know, where do we get this started? I have some suggestions for you. These are certainly goals that you can adapt for your own size of your market and your customer segment. I would love for you over the next few weeks to talk with 15 individuals. This is a relatively arbitrary number. Generally, we tend to think that somewhere around 30 to 50 of the same customer segment really gives you very solid rationale for business decisions you've made. Whether you're pitching to an investor or in sort of a business plan competition, saying that you have individually talked to 30 or more people who represent your customer is a really powerful representation of your willingness to put in the work, the fact that you have in fact validated assumptions underlying your business, that you found sort of common trends and feedback, and that you know what you're talking about with your customer segment. So in order to get there, I'm going to have you start halfway at 15. I'd love in the next week for you to do at least 2. This will require you to outreach to people in your network and request time on their schedule relatively quickly. And then over the next month, I think it's a reasonable, but again, high achieving goal to say that you want to do 100 interviews or outreach to 100 people, and with the goal of 30 interviews. The sort of outreach to interview ratio can vary slightly by sector, but it's not uncommon to have as low as a 10% return rate on your outreach. So don't feel discouraged if people are not getting back to you. It is fairly common. What it should tell you is that you may need to play around with your outreach message and how you represent yourself and how you follow up with that person to really secure the time with them. All right, so if you've done your interviews and you're asking yourself sort of what do you do next, I would say look at the list of people that you've interviewed, see how they compare to your stakeholder map. Is there anyone, in terms of your economic buyer and your user, did you talk to the right people? Is there anyone missing whose voice really matters? So did you hear over and over that there's a key influencer or a key decision maker who you need to go now talk to and better understand, because they are going to either prohibit or help accelerate the willingness to buy and adopt your product. Think about who people told you would benefit from talking with. Should you go out and find more of that version of a person? And then ultimately what you're looking for is trends in the feedback. So throughout your customer discovery interviews, you should be capturing notes. Toward the end, or sort of as pockets of 10 people, let's say you get finished with interviewing, you should look and see if there are trends. Are you validating any of the assumptions you went in testing? Once you talk to one group, are you ready to sort of make a slight pivot and try a different related customer segment? And then really, again, you're just trying to determine whether or not these interviews have sufficiently helped you test these key hypotheses around your business model. And ultimately, my advice is do more. So there's never been a founder that talked to too many people and got too much feedback. The better you can understand your market and all the stakeholders, the better you'll be able to go into sales mode and deliver a solution that actually sort of is supported and liked and valued by all of the stakeholders involved. Before I go into additional resources, I'm going to take a look at the chat feature here. I think that that there are a couple questions that have come in that I just want to make sure I've captured. I see a question about how you would craft interview if services you're providing are free to end users. The experience and service provided by the product is free and wouldn't apply to the buyers ultimately paying. Yeah, so again, this is where your sort of end user, the person getting the value, and who's paying for it are going to be different. Those are two really important voices that you should spend time interviewing sort of as separate stakeholders that you need to understand. Ultimately, you need to figure out whether the person or the company or the organization who's going to be funding it is willing to fund it. Does the problem you're solving, does connecting with those end users have the value you think it does? That's really important. Secondarily of importance is the end user, sort of will they use it? These two-sided markets can be complicated. It's important that you talk to both of those. And is it useful to share the business idea as a starting point? My answer is no to sharing the business idea, but I'm going to sort of give that some caveats. To get you started, it is helpful to talk about the problem you're looking to solve or the thing you're interested in talking to them about. So don't be so vague that the person sort of has no idea what you want to talk with them about. That can be really confusing and kind of off-putting in the scenario. That's why, again, I recommend figuring out how you start the conversation, getting them headed in the right direction, but don't narrow in too much on your particular business idea. It's a bit of an art. I'm happy to sort of take offline more individual questions. Sometimes people like to share, outreach approaches with me or other Polsky team members to get feedback on, similar to interview questions, and any of my colleagues and I are happy to give you thoughts. Ultimately, you're only going to know how to answer these by testing these approaches and seeing what does and doesn't work. So customer discovery is all about pivoting. There's a question about, does customer discovery change when starting a business versus innovating within an existing company? Not at all. I think that, again, if you're in an existing company and you're thinking about being innovative, that's fantastic. And the same process of sort of going out and talking to key stakeholders and decision makers is incredibly important. So if you're thinking about offering a new service or delivering a new process change, the people who are going to be impacted by that and those who are going to be funding it are your customers. And so you should go out and do similar processes. What is the key to go as a friendly approach rather than a salesperson? Yeah, so I think the outreach approach that I mentioned tries to do that, where you're saying, listen, you know, I'm somebody who's interested in the problem of X, Y, and Z. You are an expert in this field, and I would love some time to ask you some specific questions about what you see in this space, and I'm really passionate about trying to solve this problem. That's very different than I have a solution that does X, Y, and Z, and I want to tell you about it. There's no value to someone in the way that you phrased that, right? We don't want to be told something. We like to be asked questions and for our feedback to matter. So really great questions. In the interest of time, I wanted to refer you to a couple of resources. This book by Giff Constable is fantastic. It's called Talking to Humans. You can get it for free online, or you can order a hard copy through Amazon. Really simple, easy read about how to do customer discovery with the same methodology that I described today. For those of you interested in thinking about how to do COVID interviewing, there is a web article by Steve Blank. And Elaine Chen is also a great voice in terms of sort of customer discovery and early entrepreneurship. She talks about a landing page. This is, you know, customer discovery sort of post interviews, thinking about how you test out information and interest in what you're delivering. For anyone who came into the session today and is still trying to figure out, like, what is my customer segment, or what market do I think I want to head? Here are some really great resources. Where to Play will help walk you through and map out how you evaluate different opportunities and different customer segments. And then the Customer Innovation Map, this is, sort of jobs to be done model, is another helpful model that may inform your thinking around your business model. So I appreciate all the questions that have come through. I know we're up against time. Thank you so much. You're welcome to reach out to me or any of the Polsky team members if you would like additional coaching. And I appreciate the time you spent today on customer discovery and wish you all the best of luck in your customer discovery journey.